If you've been looking to step up your astro game with flat field optics, but think it's probably too expensive to make the leap, there's a new player in town that might just make that upgrade possible. The SVBony SV555, a fast, variable aperture apochromatic lens that may just be the least expensive flat field refractor style telescope in the 240mm range, which is definitely a sweet spot for astrophotography.
Alright, enough goofing around. So this is a quick review of the SVBony SV555.
There's been a lot of buzz about this new 243mm refractor, some good, some bad, so I wanted a first-hand look at this telescope to see exactly what it had to offer. So while I did reach out to SVBony about the telescope for technical help and for review, I was not compensated in any way for the review, and all of the comments on the telescope are my own. This is a completely honest review, good or bad, for the SV555. One of the really unique things about this telescope is that it is a variable aperture telescope, which means it's almost like a cross between a regular terrestrial camera lens and an astronomy telescope. The variable aperture will go from f4.5 up to f22, or I should say down to f22. And it would be a rare situation that you would need to change the aperture from the widest open setting when doing astrophotography, but there are times when you might be able to use that, and you would certainly use that for terrestrial imaging. One of the downsides to a variable aperture is that it can potentially cause star spiking on some of the large bright stars in your image. This spiking is caused from where the blades and the aperture actually come together inside the OTA. The other thing that really stands out to me about the SV555 is the build quality. It's just absolutely built like a tank. Everything on it is solid, including the focus ring, the aperture dials, the 360 rotator dial. They're all very solid. And the lens hood is kind of a one-piece design that you can actually screw off. So let's dive into this review and see what this telescope is all about.
I've had this scope for a while now, and it's taken quite a while to get around to doing the review. The weather has just been terrible for doing any kind of imaging. It was probably below average seeing conditions and transparency, but it was still enough to test the scope and to check the flat field optics and check the color representation. It punches way above its weight for the price. Normally you would have to pay double, maybe even triple the amount, for truly flat field optics. This is a 54mm f4.5 to f22 aperture scope. So it is a variable aperture scope, and that's kind of unusual for astronomical telescopes. You're going to want to leave that aperture all the way open at f4.5 for astro imaging, but there are some times when it can be helpful. Say for instance, if you're doing lunar observations and the moon is just so incredibly bright, especially on a full moon, and a lot of cameras will actually overexpose it. Sometimes you have to add a filter just to kind of bring it back down a little bit. And so setting this scope on like maybe f8, can actually be a benefit in that type of situation.
The 54mm aperture and the Petzval design should work very well with the APS-C sensor size, and also, according to the specs, with up to a full frame 44mm sensor size. The riser for the EAF is not needed if you are just mounting the scope and using manual focus, but I show it added here just to show the clearance that it does provide for the EAF. So when you receive the SV555, there's a little assembly needed to get it up and running. So I will walk you through the simple steps to put it together with the EAF kit and give you a couple of tips that might help along the way. But first, note the design, the all black aesthetic. It will show some fingerprints, as you can see here, but I really like it. It's just a nice kind of pure look to it. So the focus and aperture rings are smooth with no clicks or stops. The 360 rotator at the back end is also very smooth. All the adjustment rings have lock knobs that are removable if needed. All the dials are marked very well with painted white style that's easy to see at night. I would have preferred to see etched in markings, but Of course, that can also greatly add to the cost of an OTA, and I don't think that was the goal for the SV555. So we will begin to put this together with the dovetail plate and the riser for the EAF. The dovetail is both Vixen and Arca Swiss compatible. On the riser, there's a small keyway that slots into the dovetail plate. It seems like it's kind of going in sideways when you mount this, but this is the correct way, so you can add the ring on top. I guess if I had one issue with the scope, it would be the single holder ring, as the scope is so heavy that you need to take care to tighten it down very well to avoid any flexure. I think with the EAF belt pulling down on the OTA, it could potentially create some flexure if it doesn't have a second holder ring. But the ring has nice felt padding inside to keep from marring the OTA. The two longest bolts will hold all of these three pieces together, and I'm glad they did it this way, as it's a no-nonsense design instead of having bolts for the riser and the dovetail plate, and then another set for the riser and attaching that to the ring. They thread in easily and create a very solid connection, and since each piece is slotted, it greatly reduces any chance of flexure. You'll also notice extra mounting screw holes for other accessories on the O-ring. The top handle accessory bar is also very nice with a slotted groove in the dovetail saddle and 3 locking screw holes for different size plates. Once attached, you're ready to place the scope in the ring. Take care the locking knob on the ring is super tight to reduce any flexure here. The black bracket is for the EAF, and as you'll see, the hole for the shaft and the slots for the connection bolts. So you'll have to orient the EAF to match the slot for the small screws, and we'll just finger tighten these for now as we can adjust the fit later. From here, we'll add the belt gear, which is kind of the tricky part for the assembly as the screws are tiny. There are 2 holes on the belt gear for the set screws, and the best way to get them in is to first put them on the Allen key. This key was the only thing that actually didn't come with the scope. It had a small Allen key, but it was just not small enough for these tiny screws. Luckily, I had one at home that had originally come with my ZWO EAF kit. So the tricky part is getting the set screw onto the key without dropping it and losing this screw. This is another area that SVBony might be able to improve later, as simply just setting the screw into the gear might be a better option, because if this thing falls out, if it falls on some dark, thick carpet, it may be lost to the void forever. When putting the gear on the EAF shaft, make sure to slide it down to where you still have clean access to the screw holes for when you need to remove it. Admittedly, this procedure is a bit fiddly, but once you get the first screw locked down tight, the rest goes quickly. Let's make sure that the locking screws on the aperture and the focus rings are removed, as if they are left on, they can hit the top of the EAF. We'll put the screws in the plastic bag for safekeeping, and you can leave on the locking knob on the rotator, as it really doesn't interfere with anything. Now we can begin to add the EAF and belt. So we're going to slide on the belt first. You'll want to place the belt in the grooves of the focus ring as to keep the pull over the gear nice and straight. And then screw the EAF bracket to the dovetail plate. These screws can just be finger tight at this point, as we'll need to adjust the distance to the belt hanging from the focus ring so they line up properly. Again, this process is a bit finicky, but with some patience, it all goes together as it should. Take your time and make sure the belt is straight, and once it's on, you can begin to lock the screws down on the dovetail plate and then move to the screws on the black EAF bracket once it's aligned properly. And there you have it. Not a bad looking piece of kit, is it? Ready to shoot for the stars. Well, okay, that is after you put the camera on it, of course. The back end of the scope has 4 small screws where you can take the back plate off if you do want to add in a filter. However, when you have something as easy as a filter drawer that you can add, I really see no reason to do this, as opening up the rear of your scope is also a really good way to just add more dust inside the OTA. So, do yourself a favor and get the filter drawer It's, if you don't already have one, I guarantee it will make things a lot easier. It saves time and more than likely a lost screw or two on the back of your scope. So as with most astronomical gear, until you test it with your own accessories and your camera, you may not really know the full story on performance, because it's even the case that two people with the exact same gear can even have different results. I did notice some other reviewers of the SV55 having some slight star spikes on one side of their largest stars. During the focus routine on the EAF, I did notice some spiking just before it reached the target focus position. So make sure your focus is absolutely spot on, and that might actually help any potential spiking that can occur. Again, this also just shows that each scope and how it's paired with your particular camera and accessories give a scope a sort of a personality all its own. Some scopes have a nice sweet personality, and some might want to fight you at every step of the way. It's really just all about experience with your own configuration and learning the nuances that it might have. So, will the SV555 perform as good as an ASCAR SQA55? Probably not, but the ASCAR is also about $200 more than the SV555, so it all comes down to how deep your pockets are and basically how much of a pixel peeper that you are, I guess. Perhaps I'll make the leap to the ASCAR down the road if I feel that I can afford it, but for me right now, the SV555 will definitely get its rightful place on my mount, as I think it's a great option for someone looking to get into travel-ready flat-field optics at a reasonable price. This was meant to be an affordable flat field scope that most could afford, so while it still gives you great performance, there's really no bells and whistles aside from the EAF mounting kit coming standard with the scope. I wouldn't really place this in the same league as, say, perhaps the ASCAR SQA55 or even really the RedCat 51 as far as fit and finish, but the optical quality is extraordinary for the price. And I think that is really the main purpose of the SV555. I think it does point a bit of a finger at its more expensive rivals to show that flat field optics and a great build quality can be achieved for a more reasonable price. Despite the seeing and transparency conditions being below normal, I decided to go ahead and target the Rosette Nebula. It's a really good area to check focus because there's plenty of stars in both the core and the outside region, but it's just also a beautiful target in general.
If you know the Rosette, you probably recognize that central star cluster right there. I'll focus more on the star cluster than the entire nebula, but 243 millimeters, especially with this camera. This is the ASI 183 MC Pro, which is a one-shot color camera, but it is perfect for something like the Rosette Nebula. I mean, it's an Orion killer. Andromeda is absolutely bang on to get both of the dwarf galaxies in with the Andromeda galaxy. Yeah, the star shapes look really good. Even though my guiding is 0.6, 0.59, so it is getting better. But let me show you the star shapes here. This is the central core. I don't know if that reflection's gonna mess it up, but you can see they're nice and round in the central core. And obviously this is a test shot because I wouldn't have this light on right here. So okay, yep, 30-second shot. Stars are nice and tight. I don't know if you can see the color in this shot. You probably can't see it on this screen, especially because this light is reflecting off the lens, but you can kind of see some red and blue in the stars, which is good. It's a good sign for 30 seconds. So I'm going to turn off this light, go back inside and control this puppy from my laptop inside. So let's do it.
Okay, so here is just a single subframe of the Rosette Nebula, and this is with no processing whatsoever. It's just a single subframe loaded into PixInsight, and then just with a regular stretch done on it. This is the Aberration inspector showing the top left and top corners, and the top and top right. All the stars are nice and round, surprisingly. The middle left and middle panels, of course, look good. Middle right look good, and lower left and bottom panels, not a whole lot of stars in there, but you can definitely still see that they're round. And then in the bottom and lower right, they're still round. And then here is the final image of the Rosette. It is a fully processed image. The Aberration inspector, you're gonna see a lot more stars since this is a processed image, but they're all nice and round, especially after going through the sharpening process and noise reduction, background extraction, things like that. From the raw processed image to the final image, they're going to get even better, but as you can tell, the SV555 really performs well. It does exactly what it promises with flat field optics. The color representation is good. There's no haloing. There's no any major chromatic aberration that I could tell on any of my images. So I am very happy with this telescope. I think it's going to make a really nice addition to my telescope arsenal.
I was using a Antlia quad band light pollution filter with this, and so that does actually kind of significantly mute the color saturation. You have to kind of go in and post and boost the saturation back up for it to to look normal. I know there's been a lot of talk recently about this particular scope. Queeve the Lazy Geek did a really good review on it. Trevor Jones from Astro Backyard did a really good review on it. When Queeve's review first came out, that was kind of before it was known that the first initial batch of these telescopes would not reach full focus. The initial scope that I had received was like that. I worked and worked to try to get that scope to reach full focus, and it was just slightly off. It would just not reach full focus. And it's kind of like receiving a new toy on Christmas morning and not having the batteries to play with it. It just would not work for imaging that night. So I did reach out to SVBony. I told them what the issue was. I sent them some photos and like a detailed list of exactly how I put the scope together as far as the backspacing, all that. And they were very quick to respond. They responded the next day, and they said that they were going to do whatever needed to be done to rectify the situation. In the past, I'd used quite a lot of SVBony products. I think every astrophotographer out there always says SVBony, and thanks to Trevor from Astro Backyard to let us know that, hey, it is actually pronounced SVBony. Who knew? So over the years, the products that I'd used from them, a lot of small adapters and filters and things like that, and they all seemed to be really good quality. Had no complaints with them. And for the price, they were really good. So it seems like the company has also been known for making like beginner style telescopes, telescopes that are more affordable for people that are just entering into the hobby. But a lot of times, with those beginner style telescopes, the optics aren't quite as good. You're not usually going to have a flat field. You might have some haloing, some chromatic aberration and things like that, and those scopes did have a little bit of that. They were not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but they did have some issues like that. But this scope is definitely, I think SVBony is making a statement with this scope that they are really wanting to up their game and get into building some of these higher end scopes. I have not actually tried this on terrestrial imaging, but generally speaking, if you have a lens that performs well for astrophotography, yeah, this is going to make a really good terrestrial lens as well. I mean, I really didn't see any chromatic aberration in my copy. One thing that Queeve and Trevor talked about on Trevor's review is that it's possible that these scopes might be kind of an equipment lottery type situation. You might get a good copy here or a bad copy there. There are some lenses and scopes out there that are kind of notorious for that. Some of the Rokinon lenses can be like that. The Rokinon 135 is most certainly like that. Their 35mm is most definitely like that. I would certainly reach out to SVBony if there is any kind of issues. They were very, very easy to work with. Their customer service is great. You know, it might take them a little bit of time to get back to you, but they will get back to you. And it seems like they have been very good about handling any kind of issues like that. So I hope that you've enjoyed this review. I'll show you the final image, a nice close-up shot of that for you, so you can really see the sharpness and clarity and the color that this scope can actually provide. And I appreciate you watching the review, and as always, like and subscribe, hit that notification bell if you would like to see more of this type of content. And as always, keep looking for that strange light in strange places.